Well, hello again, everyone, and I hope everyone's getting excited for Christmas coming up in just a couple days. This is not going to be a long video because I know some of you know my husband had surgery this week, and it's been a little weird kind of recovery with some complications and stuff. And then, of course, Christmas is 2 days away, and I am not ready, and I still have some freelance work I have to finish up. But I did want to talk to you just a little bit and go on over to worldofthesupernatural.com to the blog. I'm going to put the link down in the description here and please read the blog that I wrote this week about Charles Dickens and the supernatural. It was so interesting to me. Um, it's just kind of rereading A Christmas Carol and some other of his 20 ghost stories that he wrote during his life and started to look up some information about why he was so interested in ghost stories. And it was fascinating. I had no idea about this, and it was so interesting to read that he really had a lifelong fascination with, not just like ghost stories, but with actual paranormal activity. And he was actively involved in paranormal research and was one of the founding members of the famous Ghost Club in London. This was like the first ghost hunting society, paranormal investigation society. And it had all these esteemed members like Arthur Conan Doyle and William Butler Yeats and on and on and on. And yeah, they were ghost hunters, but they were skeptics. So they were more like, I would say, more like Houdini than Harry Price. Like they were trying to disprove that a lot of this stuff. And of course, this was during the heyday of the spiritualist movement when like everybody and his uncle was trying to communicate with the dead. And so they were really formed to debunk a lot of what was going on. And he got into some heated arguments with spiritualists about all of what they were doing because he had this really interesting idea, which was very progressive for the time. He believed that most of what people were experiencing with, seeing ghosts, he believed were phantasms of the dying. So he felt it was like a telepathic episode, so that somebody that was dying would be able to like project or communicate themselves to someone like a loved one, right? And I found it so fascinating because there's a classic work of parapsychology called Phantasms of the Living that was published in the 19th century. And I put a link to that down below here and also in the blog. And this is a huge compendium of all of these hundreds of cases in which, at the moment of death or at a moment of crisis in someone's life, they appeared to someone far away there where they couldn't have possibly have been. This has always been an intriguing subject for me because this was one of the first ghost stories I ever heard, and I heard it from my mother. My uncle Will, her brother, was a pacifist and a poet, but he volunteered to join the army in 1941, and he was on the ship going to war when Pearl Harbor broke out, right? When Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he was away for 4 years. He never came home, wrote letters home and things like that, but he never came home in 4 years. And then 4 years after he had shipped out, uh, my grandmother woke up in her bedroom in the middle of the night, sat straight up in bed, and William was standing at the bottom of the bed dressed in uniform. And she cried out with joy and said, "Joseph," her husband, "wake up, William's home." My uncle woke up, saw William there too, and at that instant, William disappeared. And as you can probably imagine, the next day they got a telegram from the War Department saying that William had been killed in an airfield explosion on Saipan Island in the Mariana Islands. So that was one of the first ghost stories I ever heard. So you can imagine, throughout my career, I've been very fascinated. This is called a phantasm when the person is actually still alive or is dying. It's called a phantasm of the living or a phantasm of the dying. And this is something that Charles Dickens strongly believed in. And he believed in telepathy or, psychic functioning was responsible for um, most or all of what people were calling ghosts or spirits or the dead at the time, right? So I found that very interesting. I also made a note in the blog about something that was happening when I was into EVP research, trying to communicate with spirits. And I was using a device that had been invented by Bill Chappell. He invents all the devices for Ghost Adventures and, all these shows. And the device is called an Ovilus, and it's like the iPhone, like there's all these different versions of it. They're still being made, I believe. But this is like the first one, and it was a little device, and it had a 1,000-word dictionary in it, and it would speak. And the idea behind the Ovilus is that you ask questions or you try to talk to any spirits that might be there, and that the theory, each one of the words in the dictionary that's in this device uh corroborates with or lines up with a level in the electromagnetic field. So the theory is that the spirits are able to manipulate the EM field in order to say the word they want to say, which sounds absolutely insane, but that's the theory, right? And they're very popular devices. And I have to admit, when I first got it, it was so exciting to hear like this, it's like a robot voice, this robot voice, speaking back when you're asking these questions. Just one of the many ways we get sucked into EVP research. But it was fascinating. But I started to feel like my own thoughts were coming out on the device. And my example that I talked about in the blog was that this one time I was at Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, this very haunted cemetery here in the Chicago area that I've written a whole book about. And I had this device, and I had been there for many hours because I was doing an experiment with some fellow researchers, and we were going to take readings every hour for like 12 hours, different environmental readings. And so I was running this Ovilus device, and I wanted to go home. I was very tired. And I thought to myself, I really wish I could go home now. I'm so tired. And this device said home. Okay. Then a couple of minutes later, I was thinking like, oh, I can't go home for so long because we have to take these readings every several hours. And the device said hour. And then I was thinking it wouldn't be so bad if my feet weren't so wet because it was really muddy that day. Anybody that's been there knows it gets really muddy there when it rains. My shoes were caked with mud. My feet were soaking wet. And this device said rain. So, I kind of filed this away. And the next time I used it, it was like the same thing happened. And the next time, the same thing happened. And down the line, I was talking to some fellow researchers about the Ovilus, and they all had noticed the same phenomenon. So I was thinking, I bet Charles Dickens would get a real kick out of using this Ovilus because, he believed that it was telepathy or psychic functioning that was causing a lot of what people were calling ghosts and spirits. So I thought that was kind of cool. But at any rate, the reason, of course, Charles Dickens became so interested in ghosts and ghost stories from a young age, like so many of us. And I saw a lot of myself in him because when he was little, his nanny, who was only 13 years old, used to tell him these terrifying stories with all the hand gestures and creepy sounds. And he said that she would just make him absolutely miserable with terror, and he loved it, and later on he would love reducing his audience to tears. Like he would write to his wife and say, I did this reading tonight of one of my ghost stories, and this woman had to be carried out. She was sobbing so violently. So he loved instilling that kind of fear in his audience later on too. And he used to read up these gruesome horror magazines when he was a little boy that I'm sure he wasn't allowed to read, but he's got his hands on them anyway. So it started out, a lot that same way. But he's had a lot of interesting experiences during his life where he was just adamantly opposed to the belief in spirits, but he kept having these kinds of experiences, and he would always dismiss them as some kind of telepathic thing or something of the mind, something from his mind or someone else's mind. For example, he had was very close to his wife's sister, Mary Hogarth. In fact, a lot of people think that they were lovers, which it does not seem to be the case at all. They were just very, very close, like brother and sister. And when she died, he had a lot of dreams about her. He had times where he felt he saw her. Um, so that was interesting. There was another interesting uh occasion that he was staying in a an Italian convent, and he woke up in the middle of the night, right towards dawn, and he saw what appeared to be the Blessed Virgin Mary at the foot of his bed, wearing like a blue, robe, the whole bit. And he had a conversation with this apparition about religion, where he asked the apparition if he should become a Catholic. So you can read the blog to see what this apparition said about that. But he, at the moment, he was absolutely engaged in conversation with this apparition. But then, later on, he told his friend and later biographer that it must have been because he was staying in the convent, that he had in his mind like the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that his mind, it was his something that had come from his mind. So that's, so he would do this throughout his life. He would have an intense paranormal experience and then and be in that moment and totally believe it. And then later on he would um, dismiss it. You guys know I know I've talked about this before if you've seen me speak about my own history, that when we started doing the ghost tours, 25 years ago now, that after just a couple of weeks I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a man standing on my chest. And I remember I sat there telling, it went on for like 15 minutes before this thing disappeared. And I was sitting there going, don't tell yourself this didn't happen. Don't tell yourself this didn't happen. This is happening. This is happening. This is happening. And it was still hard, even though I did that and I was in the moment, I was wide awake and I was telling myself, do not tell yourself this didn't happen later. It's still, hard to believe that that happened later, and you still are tempted to dismiss it as something coming from your own mind or, a dream or something like that. So it was very fascinating because I saw a lot in Dickens of the kind of things that I've experienced and the thoughts I've had about things over my life. And I was really surprised to see that he was so actively involved in paranormal, research. In fact, there was he, tried to be an actual ghost hunter at one point. He wrote to a spiritualist colleague and said, is there a haunted house that I and me and my friends can go and stay in for a few days?" So he was trying to actually go out to haunted houses and investigate, which I also found kind of funny. But appropriate, I guess, too. So the last thing is, I recorded for you guys for Christmas a ghost story for Christmas, which is a long tradition in England. A lot of it starting with Charles Dickens. And every year, like the BBC will release a ghost story for Christmas on Christmas Eve. So I know a lot of you, like myself, always watch A Christmas Carol late at night on Christmas Eve. I always watch it when I get home from midnight mass. Keeps me up till like 5 in the morning. I used to put the girls' toys together when they were little while I watched it after midnight mass, which I was staying at. But the uh, the story that I recorded for you, which will be up on this channel at midnight tomorrow night, so Christmas Eve morning, it'll be up. It's called The Signalman, and it's about a railway signalman, and it's one of his darkest ghost stories and one of his last. And the story was influenced by two events that happened to Dickens himself, railroad accidents that one that was not personal for him, but was very affecting to Britain when it happened because it was so deadly and gruesome. And the other was something that personally happened to him. And you can read about both of those in the blog. But it was really interesting to see because he seemed during his life like he would work out things that were of anguish to him through these ghost stories, not only in the death of people that he loved, but in and other things that he read about in the papers, or other things that happened to him. It was seemed to be a way where he would like write an alternate ending almost, where it wasn't so bad or the bad thing didn't happen. So it's very fascinating. So I do hope you check the blog out because there's a lot more information in there. And I hope you pick up. I've got some in the blog, I've got some recommendations for some Dickens books and some other books like Phantasms of the Living. I do get a little something if you buy it through the blog from Amazon. Every little bit helps to keep me doing this. And but I never recommend anything I wouldn't recommend anyway. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have a blessed, beautiful Christmas, and I hope you check out the audio recording of the Signalman when it comes out on Sunday morning. And I hope you just have a wonderful, blessed Christmas with your family, and I will see you next week. Take good care, and until then, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski.